morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. What a day it is around Dog Nation. You already know it. Five-star offensive tackle Jackson Cantwell will make his commitment decision later on today, public for the world to hear, live from his hometown of Missouri. For some reason, I always want to say a different state other than Missouri. Not quite sure why. But nonetheless, Dog Nation on hand to cover it live. You will see that this afternoon. We'll go on the air 3:30-ish or so. Dog Nation video channels, we will give that to you live. We're going to break down every angle of that decision here coming up. Also want to take a moment to say hello to our audience here today as well. We'll take some of your comments after the show today, too, as a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down. This is obviously a busy day for us. Our show reflects that. Two great guests, Connor Riley stopping by, former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm on the show here today there as well. Our buddy Rambo checking in from Arcade. Be careful speeding through there, as almost any Georgia fan who's ever gone to a game can attest. Baruch Dog checking in. Glad to have him here. Johnny Prescott on hand. Randy Hall says it's the official chortle day. No doubt plenty of opportunity to celebrate with a chortle for sure. Bill Camacho says he can't wait for the Cantwell commitment. Getting ready to go down a little bit later on today. That is obviously good. Our buddy Doghouse Lawn Care is in here today. You love that. UGA Marine, Low Country Dog, Morris Rich is in here. I feel like we haven't seen Orlando Dog in a while. I'm glad to have him in here today as well. Glad to have all of you. Fun, busy show. We're going to try to sift through some of the mysterious stuff that's going on and everything else. In fact, let me fire up the animation. We will tell you all about it here today. Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. It is Jackson Cantwell Day, and we are all over, including, and this is really exciting, and I want to hear this for the first time just like you do, we actually have fresh sound from Cantwell talking about his commitment decision, never before heard. We're going to give that to you here coming up in a couple of minutes. Great day to be here. We got some fresh audio from Cantwell about the nature of this decision. We're going to hear that here coming up in a minute. Also, it's Connor Riley, Jeff Sintel on the show today. And to kind of kick things off, and admittedly, I do like this. I maybe even like this more than the average Georgia fan does. I love the drama before a commitment announcement. I love the mystery and the intrigue. Is it intentional to kind of throw you off the scent? Is it real with the chance that someone's going to swoop in here and try to buy this one away from Georgia at the last minute? I mean, I have to admit, I'm just here for all of this, and so we're going to try to do our part to figure this out. And as I said, we'll let you have a chance to hear from Cantwell himself before we do a live broadcast of his commitment decision later on this evening. What a day. Great times. We're glad you're with us for it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get it started. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by ServPro. Cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Coming up in a matter of moments, we're going to give you a chance to hear from five-star offensive tackle Jackson Cantwell on the day of his commitment decision. This is fresh audio, never before played. It is, if you'll allow me to say it in sort of a pretentious manner, a DawgNation exclusive. We will give that to you here coming up in a little bit, what's on his mind, the thought process here, the role that NIL plays in all of this, all of that coming up from Jackson Cantwell just a few minutes from right now. Also, don't forget, later on this afternoon, live from Missouri, we will be covering the Cantwell commitment ceremony live. We'll show it to you. You'll see who ends up getting the decision here, whether it's Georgia or you've heard Miami, you've heard Oregon. There are other, I guess, suitors. But perhaps it's a Georgia, Miami, Oregon battle here down to the wire. We will see it live, and we will react on the air. And maybe I'll be chortling in happiness with the Cantwell news, or maybe we'll chalk this up, as we have lately, to just somebody sort of swooping in and doing whatever at the last minute. That is just the way it goes. This is really good drama. And I do think I probably have a little higher tolerance for some of this recruiting drama than some of y'all do. Some of y'all are like, well, just wait when it's over with, or, just tell me how it goes down. But honestly, I like the mystery here. And I like the way in which it's either intentional, like subterfuge, or perhaps it's just, actual late movement, perhaps with someone trying to wrestle Cantwell away. I kind of like all of this. So before we hear from Cantwell himself, let me kind of walk you through what we do know last sort of 24 hours-ish. Of course, our Jeff Sentell and Kaylee Mansell, both in Missouri, so they've been kind of on the ground there, monitoring everything that has gone down. We understand that yesterday at Cantwell's high school in Mensa, Missouri, Oregon had a chance to be at school with him. We know that Georgia got the last visit from Cantwell on its campus. That, of course, took place this past weekend, but the opportunity to go in-home with him, Oregon taking advantage of that yesterday. We don't have any word on if Miami did any kind of last-minute deal on that, but apparently Oregon did, and Oregon's trying to remain a factor in all of this. That's the chatter that's out there. I will also tell you that you may have seen this on X, that Jared Curtis' mom, fresh off his commitment to Georgia last week, she was on social media saying, hey, listen, we got to have you join us here at Georgia. So she's out there kind of having some fun with all of this, which I kind of like too. I'm happy to see the Curtis family getting involved in this. We showed you the photo yesterday of Curtis with Cantwell when Cantwell came to Athens this weekend. So pretty clearly they are trying to get involved as a family and kind of bring all of this in. And, I think the feeling that we've had here is because of the timeline. You know this. Cantwell was supposed to commit, April 30th. That commitment was postponed. We found out the reason for that postponement is that Cantwell wanted to take one more visit to Georgia. And this is just sort of recruiting 101. If we're saying follow the visits, we've always said that. Well, guess what? If it's an impromptu, previously unscheduled visit that changes the previously established timeline, well, that's definitely a visit that you want to follow as closely as you could. And so it's not really a surprise that after that alteration of the previous plan, you started seeing a lot of these official online predictions from respected national recruiting analysts, a lot of that moving in the direction of Georgia. And I think if you're just kind of following the TikTok of this, that during the weekend when Cantwell was here, because of all of the good vibey stuff that was happening around that, I think it was, I don't want to say universally understood, but certainly the consensus opinion was that Jackson Cantwell was probably going to go to Georgia. And then a very interesting thing happened yesterday. Let me show you this on the screen from Steve Wiltfong. Wiltfong, respected national recruiting analyst, wrote a story yesterday for the website that he works for, On3. The headline reads, Intel, 5-star offensive tackle Jackson Cantwell could end up somewhere other than Georgia. And Wiltfong, you obviously can read his story there at On3, but essentially making the case that while everything sort of felt like Georgia coming off the weekend visit, that suddenly Miami is making a big push. And honestly, as we told you about, one day last week, even though the Miami people are a little sensitive about this particular topic, that obviously a very prodigious NIL offer was the reason that, Miami was kind of a major factor in this. We've heard reported and rumored as much as $2 million in this year alone for Cantwell, that suddenly, what Jackson had told Jeff going back to last week was, well, the NIL offers are all close enough that I can now make a decision about my preferred school for reasons other than NIL. And the exact language on that I think is really interesting, that they were all kind of in the same ballpark with each other. And so therefore, as long as they're close like that, then the decision ultimately comes down to something other than NIL. That was an exclusive quote that Jeff Sentell got from Jackson Cantwell last week. Well, what we might be led to believe, if you kind of follow all these tea leaves and pay attention to this, is that suddenly Miami swooped in to say, well, if we were all close before, what if we're not close anymore? What if our offer is far larger than the others? You've got an agent, Drew Rosenhaus, who's obviously probably the most well-known in NFL and professional sports circles, representing the biggest names that are out there throughout his history as an agent, it would stand to reason that in a situation like that, money could really talk. And if Miami was suddenly ready to, we don't know this for a fact, but if they were suddenly ready to raise the money to a far higher degree than it had been before, maybe perhaps all of a sudden now it's not a comparison among equals with Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, Miami, all within a similar ballpark figure. Now the Miami figure is far larger than it had been before, and maybe that would be enough to win. And listen, just because the news is unpleasant doesn't mean it's not true. We're all, for the most part, Georgia fans listening and watching right now. We don't want that to be true, but we've certainly seen examples before in recruiting where that did turn out to be true, where, hey, it sort of felt like Georgia, you were kind of moving in that direction, and then the last second, something changed, most likely a big bag of money, and all of a sudden the actual announcement ends up being different than otherwise would have been. If we're being honest and frank, a lot of Georgia fans were on guard for that a week ago with Jared Curtis, and it didn't happen. Either Georgia had enough of a significant offer that they were able to hold off any would-be suitors, or Curtis just really wanted to be at Georgia for all the reasons that he stated. But that sort of last minute, somebody's going to swoop in and do that with Curtis that Georgia fans were on guard for, it just didn't happen. But that doesn't mean it can't happen in this particular case with Cantwell. Maybe the reporting from a respected analyst like Steve Wiltfong, maybe that's setting us up for that to take place here this afternoon. I'm sort of on guard for anything. I would believe anything. I actually do believe essentially nothing. I mean, I've told you that before. I have very, very high skepticism about all of this, even if I'm entertained by the drama. However, let me also give you a different angle on this for a moment from a completely different national recruiting analyst. And I actually respect this level of candor. Do you know who Adam Gorney is? Gorney has worked for Rivals. Now, in the sports business world, you know that Rivals and On3 are about to merge here, and we'll see what that means for our future as an industry. But nonetheless, up until now, Rivals has been an independent media entity. Adam Gorney is one of their national recruiting analysts. And I thought yesterday evening, I thought he put out what was a very honest take on this assessment. And frankly, I think this ought to frame the way that all of us think here. I don't really know Gorney particularly well, but I thought this was a well-stated synopsis of what may or may not be going on with Jackson Cantwell here in this sort of final 24-hour period before he gets ready to make his commitment announcement. Let me show you Gorney on the screen here saying, on the Jackson Cantwell front, either Miami is a legit contender again, which would obviously seem to be a reference to the reporting from Steve Wiltfong, either Miami is a legitimate contender again, or Georgia is the clear front runner, and the Miami buzz is building to make Tuesday more interesting. Still trying to figure out which one is true. I think when a national recruiting reporter is willing to be that honest, I think it's good for all of us. I don't listen. Rivals is a different company than me, and I don't know Gorney personally, but I do think that level of candor is probably pretty valuable. That hey, maybe it is true that Miami is up the ante here in the 11th hour, and maybe that's going to be enough to get them back into this battle with Georgia for Jackson Cantwell. Or maybe all of this is just a setup to make the actual announcement on Tuesday afternoon seem a little bit more interesting. It sort of feels like one of the two are true. Throughout history, I think we've sort of seen examples of both types of things. You know, a lot of recruits do like to protect the sanctity of their announcement, but at the same time, we also see last-minute changes in this NIL age. And for someone like Gorney to say, still trying to figure this one out here, I think it puts all of us in the same position. Now, I will give you a prediction, but I will also tell you that my prediction's not really worth a nickel. So don't take this to the bank, although I'm not sure the bank would have any interest in it either. But my prediction is I think it's probably Georgia for Cantwell. I do. And I sort of think that for two reasons. In some respects, what's going down with Jackson Cantwell does feel a little bit old school, in that we've seen a lot of recruits in recent years not be all that interested in the announcement, and in some cases kind of be okay with the fact that their eventual commitment announcement was sort of leaked. Have you ever watched the movie where you went to see the movie because you saw the trailer, But when you saw the movie, you realized that the entire movie was just sort of in the trailer, and that the trailer was just sort of a short version of what the movie was. The entire movie was essentially given away in the trailer. Have you ever had that experience before? Maybe you have. I feel like in recruiting a little bit in the last couple of years, a lot of recruits have been okay with their moment being spoiled prior to the announcement taking place. It used to be that you never spoiled the kid's moment, and now it seems like a lot of recruits don't care about that as much. It does seem like the Cantwell camp is trying to preserve the integrity of their announcement. It seems like they are, and I don't mean this in a negative way because I like this stuff. It seems like they are kind of creating a little bit of anticipation for the show here this afternoon. And as someone who enjoys, recruiting drama and things like that, I think they're well within their rights to do that. So it would be in keeping with that theme if there was sort of a potential plot twist that may or may not come true. I'm sort of banking on this being the sort of, am I using the phrase right, kind of a red herring? Am I using that right? That the Miami late interest here is maybe a red herring. The other reason why I feel that way is, and listen, I'm somebody, I'm just like a lot of you. I consume this stuff on the internet all the time, and I'm trying to find everything I can. I spend a lot of time going to like the other teams' websites, and while you've got some national reporters, kind of sort of talking up Miami here at the last little bit, it doesn't seem like, based on like the Miami sites that I've gone to, and maybe there are better Miami sites than I've seen. I won't pretend to be an expert on their media landscape. It does not seem that if you go to the local Miami websites, they are as excited about Miami getting Cantwell as some of the national reporters are. Maybe the national reporter guys just have better sources. Anything is possible. But, a lot of times these big recruiting moments sort of bubble up locally and then get recognized nationally. I don't know how frequently it kind of works the other way around. And down there in South Florida right now, I don't know that there's a lot of genuine enthusiasm on the part of the people who know the Miami part of this the most closely that Cantwell's going to actually end up there. Now, there's also a chance, and this is just the world we live in now, where by the time we get to 3 whatever this afternoon, that all of this just seems dated and some new piece of information comes in. You can't count out Oregon here either. They're obviously in kind of an aggressive position on all this too. But for now, if I had to make a bet, a prediction perhaps sure to be wrong, it's that what seemed true over the course of the weekend perhaps still prevails. That Georgia was able to convince Jackson Cantwell to give them another look. And what would have probably been a different decision on April 30th now sets up to be good news for Georgia. Maybe this last-minute rumblings and grumblings of Miami getting back involved, maybe it's real. But it seems like Georgia's done a pretty good job in this recruitment. That is my opinion on all of this. But what does Jackson Cantwell have to say about his own recruiting process? We'll tell you about that coming up, but first, let's introduce the show. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. We are happy you are with us, whether you get to us video, 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast, wherever you find them, Apple, Spotify, everything else. Just really happy to have you as a part of the program today. Also thrilled to have our friends at ServPro who make it all possible. Great sponsor, great company that's out there serving people in a time of need. That's one of those things that matters to me. I like companies that do important work, that make real things happen. And there is nothing more real. There is nothing where you recognize the fruits of your labor more so than in sort of a cleanup situation where you've had a fire breakout or you've had water intrusion, you've had a weather catastrophe, you've had something along those lines. Our friends at ServPro exist to serve you in that situation. They call themselves restoration specialists. That means, obviously in simple language, they specialize in getting your property restored to its previous condition. The way I always say it is, they get it looking like it never even happened. And if you've ever experienced something like this, you know what a real gift that is to you to be able to kind of get your property back to its previous condition, whether it be the home you live in or the place where you have your business or your, passive income, the source of that with rental property, things like that. This is important work, and our friends at ServPro do it for you. Each franchise also independently owned and operated. That means you're doing business with folks who have a vested interest in a successful outcome for you. They can work with the insurance company. They can kind of manage the entire cleanup process. If it's a large enough job, they'll have their mobile command center out there, just sort of running point on the entire thing. So I want you to find them online today. It's servpro.com, S-E-R-V, servpro.com for more on that today. All right, we got Jake Fromm coming up before we're done today. And we'll get into some different stuff with Jake, but it's going to be a lot of recruiting stuff prior to that, including Connor Riley here for a moment. But let's also get ready to go around the doghouse here right now. And let's talk about what Jackson Cantwell has, within the last 24 hours, said about the nature of his recruitment, spending some time with our Jeff Sintel. Let me sort of begin with this one here, just sort of an overarching viewpoint of kind of where the decision stands, what his thought process is like, what all of this kind of comes down to. This is new from Jackson Cantwell. Here is his mindset as he gets ready to make his decision.
I think the main thing that sparked it is I woke up one morning and I decided, well, I'm getting tired of this recruiting thing. And that was kind of when I realized, I have the power to basically end this whenever I want. And I had all the information I needed anyway. I was going to take a bunch of official visits, go all across the country. I realized, I really don't need to do that because I already have the plan. I already have, I have a good idea of what I'd be looking for in a school, and I have all the information about my top schools. So I figured, why waste time? I could just get this done now and spend all summer with my teammates and just get better.
What's the plan? What's the official wording now for what you're looking for?
What I find to be interesting about that particular statement is, and Jackson's obviously far younger than I am. I could be his father. But what's interesting about that particular statement is there are a lot of times in my life, especially when I was younger, where I sort of felt sometimes kind of paralyzed by a decision, especially a big one of, let's say it's Oregon, Georgia, Miami, 3 different schools, 3 very different locales, very different experiences on those campuses, but all offering a lot, whether it be compensation or, chance to work with some good offensive line coaches or a chance to be a part of great success. They all kind of have the things they offer too. And I can put myself in Cantwell's position if I were there. I think it'd be very easy to not really quite so sure what to do. And we sometimes see this in recruiting where whoever gets to bat last has the great chance of winning because a lot of recruits do have a hard time telling coaches no. A lot of recruits sort of fall in love every time they take a visit. And I don't say that, I'm not making fun or saying that lightly. It's very easy, I think, to just sort of get wrapped up in the entire emotion of this. But boy, and maybe this is because of the counsel he's getting from his agent or his parents, whatever else, it does seem like there's a good bit of clarity in the decision-making process for Cantwell to the point where he says, I don't really need to drag this out any further. I sort of feel like I know everything I need to know. And I think that probably speaks to the messaging he's getting from his finalists. But I think it also just sort of speaks to his ability to kind of make a firm decision and believe that he can stick with that decision. In other words, I don't get the impression, and we're always on guard for anything, of course, but based on that level of clarity, I don't get the impression that whatever Cantwell does today is somehow going to be different come December. Sounds like there's some confidence here that he's making the right choice now, and it's not really a choice that he needs to go back and reconsider or remake again, especially after the additional information that came from that most recent Georgia visit. Now, as far as what he might be looking at from the school that he wants to go to, here's a little bit more from Jackson Cantwell on that.
Here's your money quote for the article. I visited on I believe it was July 27th of 2023 was the first day I was down there, and ever since then they said I was the number 1 guy on their board, which I don't know how true that is. I'm assuming it is from kind of how they've recruited me since, but since that day, they said I was the top of their 2026 board and felt that way the whole time. So, I was very, very humbled whenever I heard that originally. And it's held true throughout. And I think I've been blessed to be in a position where that's the case for was the case for a lot of schools. But, just feeling that love from UGA the whole way, it's been really, really cool because they were one of the schools that, I wasn't really fully blown up until that Bama, Georgia trip I took my freshman year. And after that, I kind of, I went from more of a guy that had a few offers to where I had every school in the country. So it was something that it meant a lot that they jumped in that early on me and trusted their evaluation that much.
Really interesting.
I felt the love from
interesting
UGA.
line there from Cantwell. And obviously that's a reference to that. That's a quote you did read in Jeff's story with Cantwell just the other day about, what he thought was kind of the money quote of the way in which Georgia kind of showed its love to him. And if you're a Georgia fan, another thing that kind of perhaps boosts your confidence for Georgia's ability to win this particular recruiting battle here today. Very strong stuff on that. What about, though, the role that NIL plays in all of this? We just kind of referenced this a little earlier. Let's now hear more from Cantwell on kind of how that ultimately impacts his final decision. Here's Jackson Cantwell again.
Well, I do know what I will make in college right now. And the good thing about that for me is that it is very, very similar across all 4 teams of my finalists. So that will not affect my decision because honestly all of them are so close to where it can't really. So that's something that's not going to really get in the way of that. I'm very glad to be compensated well. I don't think anybody's ever complained about that. Anyone that has is a liar. But I think I'm just happy that I get to have the opportunity to make money playing the game that I love. I think that's something that is really, really cool about the modern age of college football. And I think, I would obviously love to go to the NFL, but you can't bank on anything. If you start at Georgia, you kind of can, but if you don't, that's one of my biggest misconceptions I hear in recruiting all the time that I hate is you got to go here to go to the NFL. What if something happens to you? What if you get hurt? What if you can't play football? There are things that can happen, so I want to set myself up. But, I'm in a good situation where if I was at a school and I started, I feel like I have a pretty good shot of going to the NFL regardless. So just trying to set myself up for success if I don't or if I do, really.
I think it's incredible candor from Cantwell, especially about the NIL part of it, where he doesn't shy away from the fact that he enjoys the fact that he's going to be compensated well, and obviously a player of his potential stature certainly deserves that compensation. And the final point we'll make here, and this is one we kind of touched on a little earlier, is the potentially operative word in that statement from Cantwell is, right now NIL can't be a deciding factor to me because all of the offers on the table for me, to use the word that he used, are similar. I think what we're trying to figure out in these final hours before the decision, whether or not the NIL offers on the table for him are all still similar, or if someone, we believe it might be Miami, is trying to make a more aggressive push here at the 11th hour. And if that's the case, if their offer is now far larger than the others, is that something that Cantwell would be willing to reconsider in a way that maybe he wasn't as recently as this weekend? That's where the drama sort of centers right now. We're trying to figure out what's real and what's not. To help us do that further as we wrap up around the doghouse, let's get ready to talk to another guy following all this closely. It's Connor Riley here right now on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insight.
Let's say hello to Connor Riley. And Connor, I think stuff like this is fun, whether Cantwell picks Georgia or not. I obviously hope he does pick Georgia. But we just heard Cantwell say, and it was a quote that Jeff had in the story at DawgNation.com last week, that, hey, right now NIL is not the main consideration for me, not because I don't care about money, but because the money is relatively similar across all fronts here when it comes to my finalists. Well, you got respected national guy like Steve Wiltfong, who's tried to kind of, I guess, sort of tout Miami's late involvement in this Cantwell decision. That's the last 12 to 24 hours here. Would make you wonder, if you're a Georgia fan trying to follow all of this, are all of these NIL offers for Cantwell still similar? Because as long as they were similar, I think Georgia fans liked the position where Georgia was. But if it's no longer similar, when you've got Drew Rosenhaus as your agent, perhaps that does change things a bit. That's kind of where the drama is ahead of this decision today, right?
Right, and we shouldn't be surprised by this. I think any Georgia fan that hasn't really been paying attention to what has happened in some of the other big-name recruitments of late. You think back Caleb Downs when it was between Georgia and Ohio State in the transfer portal. We think back to last year, Justice Terry, when it was believed that Georgia had won out and they had beaten out Auburn to land Terry services. And then at the 11th hour, it's Texas coming in over the top and making a big offer. in certain national level recruitments, in recruitments for players who I think have a case as the best available player, like I think Terry was at the end of last cycle, like I think Cantwell is for offensive linemen right now. This is just, I think, the reality of the way that some of these recruitments are going to go. And if you're Georgia, you still have to do everything you can to try and put yourself in the right place and hope that you're able to be financially competitive. And I do believe that Georgia is, just because they're not going to go out there and give some absurd number that I believe Miami is in the process of doing so, they're still going to be financially competitive in that number. And I think if you're a Georgia fan, you're hoping that you're willing, that Cantwell is perhaps willing to see through the desperation that Miami has and still make this level-headed decision when those offers were all equal. But at the same point in time, I'm not going to fault Cantwell or any player in this regard in terms of making a selection or a decision that is in their best interest for their future, because this is what college football has allowed this sport to become. And so when you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. And so that is, I think, where we find ourselves here as Jackson Cantwell, the number one player in the country, is set to announce his commitment later today.
So listening to what you're saying right now, I think you and I are of slightly different minds on this. And as I told the audience before, I'm happy to make a prediction. I don't think people should take my prediction to the bank. I sort of feel like all of this sort of feels like a setup. And, maybe that's just setting me up to be disappointed later on today. But the sort of last-minute involvement from Miami feels a little too interesting. It feels like, it does seem like the Cantwell camp likes the notion of people being tuned in today. They want people to be interested in Cantwell's decision. You need some last-minute drama to kind of ratchet that up. And, by the way, I'm not disparaging. I want to have interest in the announcement too. So
we've got a show to do later today.
If they're playing this up, then by all means, good for them, because that only helps all of us who try to do this content game for a living. So I'm not in any way mad about that. But if I had to kind of put my chip on the table, the last minute involvement for Miami feels a little too precious. It feels like a little too perfect. Could be wrong. The Justice Terry is certainly a counterexample where that certainly was true. And as you said, Caleb Downs was probably an example of that too when he transferred to Ohio State. But if I had to bet, especially since you don't really hear, as I mentioned before, as someone who goes to these sort of, enemy camp, message boards and things like that, you don't hear a lot of local Miami people saying this right now. It seems to all be coming from the national voice here. And, maybe that's just the national guy just having better sources. But I don't know how much I buy the last-minute push by Miami. It's just my hunch. My hunches are frequently wrong.
I like the idea of BA doing opposite research on other teams' message boards. And I do agree with you. I think that Cantwell does probably end up at Georgia if I have to make a prediction right now. And you look back at the Terry commitment and the Downs commitment. Those came in so late, and it seemed like they were going to Georgia for so long. Whereas I feel like with Cantwell, it's been a more fluid recruitment along the process. And only when he announced that he was going to be taking a late visit to Georgia and then bumped back that commitment did it seem like things really started to turn in Georgia's favor in that regard. And look, as you point out, with the national sources coming in on this and drumming up interest, which there absolutely has been in the last 24 hours, with that coming in, that wasn't present when Downs and Terry made their announcements. And so I think the small difference there is actually quite large in terms of the way that we perhaps view this. And maybe this is just us becoming less naive to these recruitments and having maybe perhaps a better understanding that, especially when you look at the teams involved, an Oregon, a Miami, I think when you see a Texas now, an Ohio State in certain circumstances, they're going to be willing to spend top dollar for premium players. And I think Cantwell absolutely falls into that bucket here because there just aren't very many offensive linemen that have the athleticism like he has.
Let me make two more points about this, and then we'll see where it goes from there. But, Georgia fans in situations like this have been a little bit, I guess the word would be sensitive. I can't think of a better word to use, because they sort of feel like that you mentioned the usual suspects, the Texases, the Miamis, maybe Oregon to a degree, that if you really do ratchet up the negotiations, there are certain schools either able to or willing to go to a place that Georgia is either incapable of or unwilling to do. And for some Georgia fans, that's anxiety-producing. It has been interesting watching the Miami fans on this because they have their own form of anxiety. And I said this before. I spend a lot of time just sort of seeing what other fans are saying. A lot of Miami fans were furious last week when I think it was Pete Nakos that reported the $2 million figure for Cantwell. The Miami perspective is while they clearly have won some NIL recruitments, they don't like the idea that somehow they're only winning because of NIL. That they've got this sort of like unlimited, bank account, and they'll just keep bidding more money. I think to them it makes them feel like they come across as gimmicky. I think they want, Mario Cristobal is an offensive line-friendly head coach. Mirabel, the position coach, is thought to be a really good one too. I think they want to be able to win these sort of recruiting battles on their merits. And I don't know how much Miami actually gets viewed that way because compared to a Georgia, they just had so much less success. They have not had college football playoff success. And so I think, the same way that Georgia fans are worried about not being able to win NIL recruitments, I think a lot of Miami fans are concerned they only win NIL recruitments. It's an interesting contrast between the two fan bases, I would say.
Right, and that Nakos report was so interesting because I think a lot of Miami fans think that it was Georgia that was putting that out there.
Yep.
Meanwhile, Nakos has been telling anybody that'll listen and letting coaches, anonymously say that they think Georgia is cheap, that they're not paying top rate for top prospects. So it's very funny to sort of see all that go in between. And if I've got my conspiracy hat on instead of my sad little Celtics hat today, I wonder if maybe Oregon's the one putting that out there and they're trying to live in the Goldilocks zone between Georgia and Miami and look at this ethical NIL power. So the Pete Nakos aspect of this all and the way that NIL has gone about being reported, with so much of it being cloak and dagger and then coming out in this regard. And seemingly every time something gets reported on it, no matter what happens, a fan base is furious in that regard, I think is very, very interesting.
The other thing that comes to mind here is that people want to ding Georgia for, even though they had draft picks a year ago, the fact the offensive line didn't play particularly well. And, yesterday on the show, we played audio from Cole Kublik, and I didn't get a chance to play everything that I could have played. But Cole, who I don't think of as a particularly pro-Georgia guy, he's on the board for the Joe Moore Award, and we think that Georgia's been shortchanged in that award a couple of times. So this is not an excessively pro-Georgia guy necessarily. But Cole we played on the show yesterday, he said it last week, was making the case for Georgia to have the best offensive line in the SEC this year, and in doing so, essentially excused a lot of last year's offensive line issues to a lack of cohesion because of injury. And I think this would be an interesting statement today. If Cantwell does choose Georgia, then much like last week was a little bit of retribution for Mike Bobo in the eyes of many, I think you'd have to sort of say the same thing about Searles today if it is Jackson Cantwell. And that whatever happened with the Georgia offensive line a year ago, objective people like SEC Network analyst Cole Kublik and Jackson Cantwell too are sort of feeling like that's just going to be a blip on the radar. So I think while Cantwell, if he comes, won't come until 2026, I do think if Cantwell chooses Georgia today, I think it's a fairly strong affirmation that whatever happened for Georgia's offensive line last season, people don't believe that's some sort of static situation that can't improve here in 2025. Would you buy that too?
I would agree with that. And I think similarly, I've said in large part, I think because of the presence of Drew Bobo, I do see a world where this Georgia offensive line, does it get to where that offensive line was in 2022 when it was coached by Stacey Searles, mind you, at that point? I don't know, but I like the potential for this group to bounce back because so much of it, one, is dependent on health, but two, I just like what Drew Bobo can do as a true center in the middle of that line in terms of communication and getting those five guys to play as one. And so I'm interested in seeing how that ultimately plays out. The other thing here that fascinates me with Stacey Searles, and look, I know you and I have discussed this, but I think both of you and I were a little surprised that Georgia elected to retain Searles based off what we saw a season ago and the way things were trending. I think if Georgia's able to hold on and land Cantwell, it will be in large part because of the relationship that Searles was able to build with Cantwell. I think we already know that and see how that plays out here. And in a way that has been incredibly rare under the Kirby Smart era. I don't know if you can tie one recruit more so to the importance of one position coach than perhaps you can with Stacey Searles. And what Cantwell is obviously going to have to develop and be a first-round guy like Broderick Jones largely became under Stacey Searles. like Amarius Mims became under Stacey Searels. But I do think that if Cantwell picks Georgia, it validates keeping Stacey Searels at Georgia, because I think it's very fair to point out that if they had moved on from Stacey Searels, they're probably not where they are with Jackson Cantwell, who is a game-changing prospect for an offensive line room that, when it's been at its best, it's because it had first-round players at offensive tackle. Georgia didn't have that a season ago, and it might this year, because I'm high on Ernest Green if he can get and stay healthy. And Monroe Fielding was a former 5-star prospect. Another player, someone that is at Georgia in large part because of the relationship he formed with Searels.
So, obviously, Cantwell's the big news, but I loved your story at DawgNation.com about Jordan Smith, the commitment that Georgia got on Mother's Day. And I think you and I are similar on this. I think this is potentially a pretty big deal. There's a chance that this is a cornerback. I mean, right now listed as a safety, but given the speed, if what is being reported about his 40-yard dash time is his actual speed at 6'2", there's a chance this is a cornerback for Georgia, and all of a sudden the value of this commitment, I would say, no disrespect to safeties, but the value of this commitment skyrockets even higher. I will admit that Jordan Smith was not really on my radar necessarily, certainly not for a Mother's Day weekend commitment. I think this is a pretty big deal for Georgia, and it sounds like you do too.
Yeah, this is, and we've spent so much time over the past week talking about a Jared Curtis from Nashville, or a Jackson Cantwell, from Nixa, Missouri, the same hometown as Jason Bourne, mind you. And yet, when Georgia's able to fall back and just land a player like a Jordan Smith, who, as you sort of point out, yes, he has tremendous upside in what he ultimately can be. And if he is 6'2" and he runs at that speed, I'm telling you one thing, he's not going to be playing safety. He's going to be playing cornerback, because they just don't make very many players of that ilk. And when you're able to rely on in-state recruiting like Georgia is, and you're able to win these guys in not really all that contentious recruitments that you've sort of seen Curtis become, that you've seen Jackson Cantwell become, I think that's huge for sustaining a program year in, year out. Georgia has 43 blue chip players in this state for the 2026 recruiting cycle. Only Texas and Florida have more, and those programs have a lot more Power 4 programs in their state to compete for guys like a Jordan Smith. And whether he is a safety or a corner at the next level, you look at the players that Georgia has consistently gotten from in-state that have been able to win those recruitments year in, year out without a whole lot of effort. I think that's a big reason why Georgia, even with all the questions that it has, is still a top 10 team every single year under Kirby Smart, where they have finished every year since he really got things up and running in that 2017 season, his second in Athens.
I think it's a really fun addition to Georgia, and under different circumstances, I believe we'd probably be talking about this a lot more than we are right now. Speaking of talking, Connor, you and I are going to do more of this today. You're going to be with us as a part of the Jackson Cantwell show later on this evening. We'll go live around 3:30 or so Eastern time. Announcement set to take place around 3:45 from Mensa, Missouri, but we'll be on hand to cover all of that. We'll speak to you later on this afternoon, and obviously keep the great stuff coming there at DawgNation.com too.
As always, it's a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's very interesting for Georgia. You get Jared Curtis last week. Let's say you do get Jackson Cantwell today. It sort of feels like a lot of momentum for Georgia to suddenly have what is essentially the top two players for the class of 2026. And I think one of the things I want to do later on this week is I kind of want to tie that into what seems to be a level of skepticism about Georgia on the field for 2025. In other words, could Georgia, I guess anything's possible. These don't necessarily have to be sort of correlated together, but is it possible that Georgia could be sort of trending downward on the field while it's also trending upward so much in recruiting? Doesn't it seem like those two things would perhaps go hand in hand a little bit more? I think I want to kind of explore that at a certain point later on this week. For now, though, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. We told you yesterday it's an exciting summer coming up here for Royal Caribbean. When you think about the debut of Star of the Seas coming up in August, the next in the Icon class of ships, and so much of the stuff that we loved with the debut of Icon of the Seas, so much of that also going to be on display when it comes to Star of the Seas here too. And it is time for you to think about being on the next iteration of this wonderful Icon class of ships sailing out of Port Canaveral. I love that because it's the port closest to where I live here in Georgia, and all the beautiful things that you see on that Icon class of ships, like the Pearl when you walk in, that gorgeous area with the stairwell, the fact that the Royal Promenade's now 2 levels, it's wider. You've got the open windows that you can get a chance to sort of see out into the ocean, see out, the gorgeous scenery where you're sailing. Of course, the dueling pianos bar is there. There are so many really fun things when it comes to this new Icon class of ships. The latest of these, Star of the Seas, is debuting this August. You need to be there. I'm hopeful I get a chance to sort of sail on it too, come back and tell you all about it. I really feel like my job done better when I can give you a chance to know what it's all going to be about. Of course, Star of the Seas is going to be showcasing some brand new things. So Jessica Slater is a wonderful travel advisor. She can tell you all about Star of the Seas and all the other really fun new stuff coming down from our friends at Royal Caribbean. Give Jessica a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com, and she's got you covered on all of that. All right, we got Jake Fromm here coming up in a moment. Let me spend a couple of minutes talking about maybe kind of one thing here for a moment, and then we'll just sort of get to Jake after that. I think it's really fun to watch the buzz growing for kind of our week one college football games. Georgia does not really have the big non-conference game this year, but man, oh man, are there some really good ones on tap to begin the 2025 season. We'll obviously be talking a lot about these. One of the biggest, though, is Texas going to play Ohio State. What a gigantic game that is. Obviously, reigning national champs against, what was it, Peter Burns and what's-his-face said the other day, the new standard bearer for the SEC, which we sort of scoff at. But nonetheless, really big game. However, what I also notice about this, with all the excitement about, kind of who's playing whom and all what's going to be going on with that, a lot of Big Ten fans are still really, really mad. And it certainly seems like, and some of this is because the president's of Major League Baseball, but it's also just kind of the Fox business strategy. There is a very good chance this Ohio State hosting Texas week one excitement, this thing ends up being a noon kickoff, because that's what Fox has had great success with. When they came into the college football space with the Big Ten, they saw that open landscape sort of step in the same way that people have been conditioned to watch NFL games at Sunday, 1 p.m. People are at home during the day. They want something to watch. They said, we can put big games at noon and we can get big ratings, and it's worked. TV audiences really, really like that. But the actual fans in the stands don't like it. And for those of you who attend games, we all know the situation at night is just different than the daytime. It's just two different sports, two different feelings. Now, Georgia, to its credit, had big atmospheres for noon kickoffs before. The Arkansas game in 2021 comes to mind for me on that. Amazing how loud that was for a noon kickoff. But it's just a lot harder to conjure all that up. The students don't have a chance to tailgate the way they want to. You don't get the light show going, the fireworks. There is just so much that happens for the night game that you don't get during the day game. And for a lot of these Big Ten fans, now this also kind of predates Fox, because honestly, a lot of these Big Ten schools were playing at 1 p.m. Eastern time and noon Eastern time, way before all this anyway. But with all the excitement about the big Ohio State-Texas game, it's interesting to see how many Ohio State fans are already really mad that what should be a big game for them and a big atmosphere might get relegated to that noon start. Georgia fans have kind of felt that before. A lot of Big Ten fans feeling that right now too. So that's one of the things the SEC can maybe count itself lucky with, is that its television partner, ABC, ESPN, right now it's kind of heavily populating those big games at night. I think for most fans who are in the stadium, they seem to like that better. I was going to do something else. Let me just sort of save that for later. For now, we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Let me get ready to go to a Kroger Fresh Take here and bring in the great former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm. And Jake, you obviously during your college career were just talking about, day games versus night games. You played in some of the biggest night game atmospheres. The Notre Dame game in 2019 comes to mind. But you also got stuck playing some of those noon games too. It is a different sport when you played at noon compared to when you're playing it at night. And if you're on the road, you like the idea of the early start because maybe those other fans aren't breathing down your neck quite as much. But what we're going to do about, who gets stuck with too many day games compared to who gets the night games, it seems like that's a growing topic around college football, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm find myself just agreeing a lot with you on kind of the nature of what kind of time game would you really like. To me, I really loved kind of that 3:30 window, especially later in the year when the clocks get reset back. You get that kind of day game feel that kind of college football is about. But then also when you come out after halftime, it's dark.
Yeah.
and then you get that kind of nighttime feel as the game is wrapping up. So for me, that was always that sweet spot that I just really, really enjoyed playing. Night games are awesome. Notre Dame in 2019 was incredible. I mean, there's so many cool just atmospheres at night that you just don't get if you don't have that night game. So noon games would definitely be my least. The only game I lost at home was at noon. So right. hate the noon games, but I also found myself, throughout, my journey throughout the NFL, I love that 1 o'clock window of kickoff. Hey, let's wake up, let's go get this thing done, and let's get back to the house. So I think you can make the argument for a lot of them, but man, for me, I love that kind of 3 to 7 o'clock window of game start time.
Yeah, so I kind of agree with you on that too. Now, I would say the night game is always the more intense atmosphere, and that's really fun. But for me, when you get into like the true fall, like you say, getting close to time change or just sort of out of like the hottest weather and getting more into like actual autumn, when you have the 3:30 game and the weather's pleasant, especially as it kind of gets a little towards sunset in the second half, to me, Athens is just like gorgeous during that time.
Awesome.
When you look out the west end zone, you sort of see the rolling hills, you kind of see the sun. Like that is Athens at its absolute apex to me. It's gorgeous. And I know it's not quite as maybe as intense as the night game, but to me, there is something about the atmosphere. And obviously I'm, not objective. This is a biased opinion. But there is something about that vibe in Athens when you have that sort of sunset type feel when you did have those sort of 3:30 starts in like true fall that I do think is just a really, really special atmosphere. Maybe not quite as intense, but man, it is gorgeous.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think we played Auburn in 2019 kind of around that window. I think it may have been 4 o'clock, and it kind of got cool there later in the game. Late in the year, I think around November. Man, it was awesome. Just one of those kind of atmospheres that you just don't get all the time, especially being so hot here in the South. You just feel like you're just sweating bullets for so many games. To actually kind of have a coolness and a brisk feel in the atmosphere with the sun shining, man, it's awesome. It's really cool.
I know you've got a lot going on. I'm not sure how closely you're following recruiting, but Georgia does have a chance today to get 5-star offensive tackle Jackson Cantwell. This is arguably the top recruit in the entire country. What does it mean for you that Georgia is at least one of the top finalists here, if not expected to get Cantwell, in some circles kind of viewed to be the favorite? This would be, now Georgia's gotten used to winning major recruiting battles, but Jake, this would be about as big as it gets for Georgia. What would it mean for you if Georgia could win this one later on today?
Yeah, I mean, this is huge, especially after getting the quarterback commit. The first thing you want to do is protect that guy. And you want to win in the trenches. I think that's been the blueprint that Saban had at Alabama. That's the blueprint that Kirby has brought over. I think you have to win the line of scrimmage, and being able to protect the quarterback, be able to run the ball with physicality. You just open up so many doors and avenues for you to have success on offense. So this is absolutely huge, and being able to get just a known guy, a freak athlete who's just going to protect that side. It doesn't get any better than that.
There's also some symbolism to this to me, and I won't pretend to know exactly how much Georgia's paying Jared Curtis or how much it's going to pay if it does get Jackson Cantwell. I won't pretend to know that exactly, but we can kind of guess at a ballpark figure just based on some of the other stuff that's out there. And I think for a lot of Georgia fans, they kind of wondered, is Georgia willing to do this? Is Georgia able to do this? Because we know how much like oil money Texas has, or money bag type boosters for Miami, Phil Knight at Oregon. I think a lot of Georgia fans have wondered, are we competing at a disadvantage in some of these situations? And Kirby's obviously going to be one of those guys that, doesn't want to make a recruitment solely about money. So some Georgia fans kind of wondered, well, can my program still win one of these? If you got Drew Rosenhaus as your agent, obviously NIL is going to be a factor here. To me, there's a symbolism that if Georgia gets Curtis and then follows it up a week later with Cantwell, that, whatever the compensation world we live in now, that's not some sort of inhibition that keeps Georgia from being able to go out and kind of win these battles. So to me, Jake, there'd be some symbolism in all this too.
Yeah, I think it starts with the kind of player and person that Kirby's trying to get. He's trying to go get a guy who doesn't love money, who doesn't love, the fame, that everything that comes with football. He wants a guy who just loves ball. And so he's getting that guy who wants to compete, wants to get better, and then wants obviously, a shot at the NFL and what better place to come and develop and play than at the University of Georgia? The track record speaks for himself. So as long as he can keep that up, keep the winning up, and keep getting guys to buy into what he's selling, because obviously it is working, I think he will continue to have an edge in the recruiting kind of pool and atmosphere, with maybe having a smaller budget than other programs.
It's our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here today on DawgNation Daily. And, of course, got a lot of great stuff going on with Kroger right now. You got graduation parties coming up. You got big Memorial Day cookouts. We know that's going to be going on, getting ready for a great summer. Well, as you get ready for all of the best that's going to be happening this time of year, and we do love this time of year, your local Kroger, the best place for all that. You can shop in-store, online, Kroger.com. You can become a Kroger Boost member as well. Earn twice the fuel points on the things you're already buying at your local Kroger. Take advantage of free grocery delivery, free grocery pickup. Just all the ways in which Kroger's making your life more convenient and putting more money back in your pocket. Our friends at Kroger doing that for you. Once again, find out more online at Kroger.com. So, Jake, I want to go back in time to your own recruitment here just for a moment. I want to ask kind of a specific question here about this. People sort of, Georgia's had so much success, and obviously you were a part of that. People kind of forget what it was like in Kirby's first year before you and Andrew and DeAndre and all those guys came in here. And in that first year, Georgia only goes 8-5. And, this is kind of leading into what I thought was the real breakthrough moment when y'all came in, number 3 class in the country, but, by a sort of numeric standpoint, maybe the best class that Georgia ever signed at that point in time. And it just kind of changed the momentum for everything forever. And obviously you guys go on to make the college football playoff there in your freshman season. But in year one for Kirby, prior to y'all getting here, it's only 8-5. They lost to Vanderbilt. There are people kind of wondering, Mark Richt's having success at Miami. Kirby's trying to figure it out as a first-time head coach. There was some of that chatter of, are we sure about this? Do we know that Kirby's going to be able to be a great coach? I'm wondering, and I know it's a long time ago now, I'm wondering how much you can kind of put yourself kind of back in that mindset of, no matter what y'all were seeing on the field at the time, the confidence that you had that it was about to be different. Now, you didn't know that maybe Chubb and Michelle was going to stay, although maybe you did. I don't know. But how much confidence did y'all have that, hey, no matter what we're seeing on the field here in Kirby's first year, the future is about to be very, very bright?
Yeah, so I would. There's a couple things that were hitting my brain and my mind there, kind of getting back into the feel and the logic and the emotion of the whole thing. I think first off, we're buying what Kirby was selling. We believed in him and the product that he was trying to form and produce there at Georgia. And I think a lot of guys, especially me and Richie, Nate, Malik, JJ, a lot of us just loved Georgia. And so there was that kind of emotional tie that we had. It's like, it was unwavering for us. It didn't matter whether or not they went 7-5 in the regular season or not. Like, hey, man, we were coming, and then we had a lot of belief in our own abilities that we were going to make that difference on the field. So kind of a lot of different things, that were playing into that. And kind of getting Richie on board. And it was just, man, there was so much fun. There's a lot of energy throughout the entire recruiting process. And I think ultimately, we just kind of believe that, hey, it's going to start with us, and we're going to make this thing happen. And we're going to find a way to win no matter what.
I think that's really interesting, Jake. I really appreciate you sharing that story. It's obviously fun, and it's kind of great to think that Georgia's still winning recruiting battles. The likes of those, even perhaps right now, maybe another one of those today. It's been a great run here for Georgia, and obviously we love the role you've played and all that. Thanks for being here as a part of our Kroger Fresh Take. Hope you have a great week, and we'll look forward to getting our chance to speak to you again soon.
Yes, sir. See you next week, Brandon. Thank you.
Great stuff there from Jake Fromm. Really fun to think about all of that. And, I think oftentimes recruiting momentum is a precursor to on-field momentum. And we'll see if that also takes shape for Georgia here in the fall of 2025. And I think we're going to talk more about that later on this week. I have some thoughts about that. I don't have quite time to unpack here right now. Let me give you a golden shoe, and this is great news. I'm sure saw some of the photos of this. So our guy, Brock Bowers, who is just one of the all-time great college football players and one of the 4 best to ever play at the University of Georgia, also apparently taking care of business in the classroom too, because even though he just got done with an incredibly successful rookie NFL season, coming back to Georgia, taking his time to graduate, and doing so in 4 years. Just an amazing run by Brock, an incredible testimony to just who he is as a guy. And you see the photo of them cap and gown for Brock Bowers. How about that? And, of course, congratulations to all the Georgia graduates. A tremendous ceremony, I understand, this past weekend. And fun to see Brock Bowers being a part of that. Golden shoes going out to everybody involved on that front. How about the lousy, stinking Gators? The only thing they're graduating from is the School of Hard Knocks after getting knocked around by Georgia a whole bunch. 1,648 days. That is how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you this afternoon. Live coverage from Jackson Cantwell. And then back tomorrow, DawgNation Daily presented by ServPro. We will look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. They'll take care of you on all of that. So this afternoon, about 3:30 Eastern time or so, we'll go live. The announcement slated to take place around 3:45. We are also, as we talked about yesterday, we're going to the new studio for this. Now, how come we're doing this show from the old studio and that from the new studio? Honestly, it's not worth telling. It's tedious. But we are going to be transporting ourselves over there here in a little bit. So we are not going to stay here all day long. But we will get your comments and kind of find out what is on your mind. Let me get a few more DawgNation.coms, and then we'll see what everybody else has got going on. DT says it's really impressive when a successful athlete returns to finish their degree. Big ups to Brock Bowers and Herschel Walker, who recently did that too. Yeah, it's awesome to see. Really is. Awesome to see. You really can't be a bigger fan of someone than I am of Brock Bowers. I just really, really like Brock Bowers a lot, and I always have. I know that's not exactly like, a hot take to say, hey, it's Brock Bowers. He may be worth cheering for. And I realize it's not, new ground necessarily, but boy, I really like Brock Bowers. Really like him. DT says, isn't Nick Chubb a free agent? Yeah, I believe he is. We showed you some great video of him the other day doing some hard work to kind of get back healthy again. Love that and root for him hard. Senior Dog 54 says Rick would have won maybe 2 national titles under the current format. I think it means college football playoff. A college football playoff era would have greatly aided Mark Richt's resume. It would have. It would have. Teams like, say, 2002 and 2007. This is one of those things that I have sort of a weirdly strong opinion about, is that I think that people think of the 2012 team as being Rick's best team and the closest to a national championship, because the theory is they almost beat Alabama. Alabama blew out Notre Dame. It was largely assumed that Georgia would have maybe done the same thing. That was Georgia's best team. But, and listen, with the future of AI, maybe one day we'll be able to simulate all this out. I don't believe 2012 is Rick's best team. I believe that 2007 is probably Rick's best team. And I do believe that 2007 team, especially with the way that it was playing by the end of the season, would have won the college football playoff. Now, we'll never know, and there's nothing I hate more than a hot take about a hypothetical situation. I can't stand that. I don't like hot takes about hypotheticals. So this is not a hot take. It's just my opinion. That I do believe that the best Rick's team was probably 2007. And at the time, I believed it in my soul that if you would have let Georgia in that BCS title game, they would have won it. I really do. And you're talking about mad, in 2007, I was not a child. I was, basically an adult. I was an adult. But you know how, when you get, this is embarrassing to say, you ever get, so mad you could cry? I was almost when I saw them take this away from Georgia, and we're not going to spend forever on this, but when I saw them on TV that night after West Virginia lost and all that kind of stuff, when I saw them, the wheel started turning. They were just going to take this from Georgia. I was so mad. And credit to Coach Richt, who went on SportsCenter that night. For people who, didn't think he was often assertive enough, he was very assertive that night, did a great job arguing on behalf of his team. I think that Kirby could have done more of that in 2023, just being honest. I thought Richt made a pretty forceful case for his team, but it was so obvious that ESPN was sort of planting the seeds of, well, they didn't even win their division, therefore they can't play the national championship. even though a couple of years later that wouldn't be an issue. I'm still mad about it, but I was so mad about that. So mad about that. That would have been really fun to have DawgNation Daily in 2007. That would have been fun. Oh my gosh, that would have been fun. Would have been really fun. I also think the 2002 team would have done well in the playoff. This would put me on an island by myself. I think that 2012 is only Rick's third best team. I think 2012 is only Rick's third best team. DT mentioning the old days of the 1 p.m. kickoff. When I was a kid, the tickets used to come printed with 1 p.m. as the starting time. Like when the tickets came in the mail, and listen, you talk about memories now. I mean, and I don't mean to make this like a nostalgia show, but my grandfather had the season tickets, and the season tickets came in the mail. Like in this day, you kids with your digital tickets, you have no idea. In this day, with like the digital, with the old printed ticket, it came like a big piece of cardboard. In the middle was just like blank, but all the tickets were individual, and you kind of ripped them off. And the sadness that I would feel as that thing got smaller and smaller and smaller. And what's funny is, in the digital age we live in now, Georgia still does printed credentials. Sophisticated members, distinguished members of the coastal elite broadcast media, we have credentials. Now, they've gone to digital parking passes, but they still have printed credentials. So I still get the same vibe that I used to get when I was a kid, which is Georgia gives you a big envelope at the beginning of the year. It used to have all the parking and all the credentials. And then over the course of a few weeks' time, it all just slowly disappears. This is probably the rantings of a crazy person. I totally understand this. This is probably the sort of things that a completely insane person thinks about. But I do get sad watching that collection. Used to be a collection of tickets, slowly whittle away and disappear. Credentials sort of slowly. They come in it's very low tech, wrapped in a rubber band, and eventually that rubber band just sort of laying there by itself with nothing inside it. Oh my gosh, that is the story of my life right there. Let's see what else. Savannah Dog says he wishes they would have kept the UCLA game. Georgia was supposed to open, was it last season in Pasadena? He says, I was looking forward to going to L.A. in August. Marshall's 1971 team. Oh, yeah, I don't know about that. But it's kind of interesting. I've heard some people say that too. I don't know how jazzed I was to go back to L.A. after having just been there. I mean, playing a regular season game in a Rose Bowl, not quite the same as playing against Oklahoma. L.A., man's a long trip for some Georgia fans who've taken it a couple of times. I don't quite know about that. Let's see what else. Let me pop over and get some YouTubes for a moment. See how people are doing over there. On YouTube, Kirby's Belt says, I hate digital tickets. My phone died before a concert 2 years ago. I have gotten a little better with digital tickets. I've gotten a little bit better about using them. But when they first became the thing, I hated them so bad. I still don't like them. And honestly, I'd be curious. Like when I was first getting old enough to go to games on my own in the 90s, when I was a teenager, I was able to drive, I'm going to games. I got really good at, I knew a lot of the ticket scalpers. I got really good at scalping tickets. I still see scalpers at the Georgia games, but I got to imagine the ticket scalping game has taken a pretty big hit by digital tickets. And something that I believe that many of you perhaps don't believe is, I believe that ticket scalpers are pro-fan. I think that some of the stuff you see for instance, I know that Georgia has talked about doing some of this stuff. I think cracking down on ticket reselling is anti-fan. If it's my season tickets, I ought to be able to sell them. I ought to be able to sell those tickets, especially given the fact that being a fan supporting your team has become a little bit of an expensive proposition. So if I've got one big game to cash in some money to recoup some of my cost, if that's a choice I want to make, it ought to be my choice to make it. And furthermore, I know a lot of Georgia fans who would say, I don't love the value of the season ticket because when you factor in contribution, the Ball State game or the Austin Peay game or the Marshall game this year, all of that becomes a pretty expensive ticket, whereas in the secondary market, those tickets become a lot cheaper. And so for some Georgia fans, they go to every game, but they're not season ticket holders. They're sort of buying on a per-game basis. Some games they pay a lot more for, some games they pay a lot less for, but it's a little bit of a cost management strategy. To me, that's a reasonable decision. I think the secondary ticket market, the fans' ability to sell onto the secondary ticket market, the fans' ability to buy on the secondary ticket market, including at scalped prices, I think that is a pro-fan economy, and I'm very much in favor of ticket resellers, which is perhaps a strange opinion, but it is my opinion nonetheless. Let us see what else. Tyrone Brown says, I smell a national championship this season. Tyrone, I'm glad to hear you say that. Here's the one thing I'm going to say, is that right now you are seeing some skepticism out there about Georgia. And listen, I'm fine with people expressing whatever opinion they want to have. I love sports talk. I think the trick is whatever opinion you have, you got to support your opinion with some sort of evidence. And you got to stick to it. What I don't want, and we're going to hold everybody's feet to the fire on this, if you're out on Georgia now, you don't get to get back in once the season begins. If you're out now, you're just out. And listen, I've gotten plenty wrong over the course of my life. There are some things where I just had to sort of eat the L, right? It's like I was wrong and I got to own it. But like back in 2022, when we had a bunch of people trying to make a name for themselves, trying to spin all that negativity after a national championship season, all that negativity about whatever, we said, hey, it's go for two in 22. All this talk about who you lost on defense and, whatever else, people being negative about Stetson Bennett, saying all kinds of slander against him. And we hadn't forgotten. All of that, we said go for 2 in 22. Now, we're not quite doing that, for this offseason. But we do think, to quote Mark Twain, that Georgia's demise has been greatly exaggerated here thus far. So to those who might be out, if you're out, you're out. So thank you, Tyrone. Let's see what else. I see there's a pretty interesting conversation about Mark Richt going on in here. I think that my feelings on Richt are pretty complicated, because I sort of see things two ways. Like, I am a football fan, of course I am, and viewed solely through the lens of a football fan cheering for his favorite football team. There were some things about Richt that would occasionally frustrate me. That is true. There were moments when I was, once again, we didn't have DawgNation Daily back then. Richt's last year was our first year. But there were some things that frustrated me about Richt. As a football fan, you have to be honest about that. However, I would count of the people that I know him a little bit, but he's not like a friend or anything like that. Richt is also one of the most important people in my life in terms of an influence on me, because I do think that Mark Richt provides a reminder, and it is an uncomfortable reminder because we like investing in our diversions. But Rick's life stands as a testament that there are things more important than football. Now, listen, obviously, I think that football is very important and fun because we talk about it every day. It's good to have hobbies. It's good to have pastimes. It's good to have, diversions from real life. It's good to have that. I think Rick's presence, though, reminded us that there are also things more important than that. And frankly, he still stands as a reminder of that. And I really, really appreciate that. And I want there to be room in college football for people like Mark Richt. It's one of the things that makes college football so special. It's one of the reasons why I think that college football should be preserved is because I think that, college football just sort of has figures like that in a way that the NFL just kind of doesn't. Other sports just kind of doesn't. So I would say that my overall feelings about Richt are complicated. If I'm just looking at this through the lens of football, there are a lot of things that, boy, I wish could have been different, think might have should have been different. Also a lot of moments where I think, man, he was so close to really kind of breaking through and having the great success that we all wanted him to have. You think about all of that. And yet, as more time passes, what I actually think about Richt as being as someone who really infused a sense of like what real life is all about in the sort of landscape of college football, like getting our attention back on things that really matter. And I think that's really important. Army Dog agrees with me about the 2007. Yes, so frustrating. George on Tap mentioning some of the Georgia administration around that time. Yeah, that's one of those things. Like I've read a lot of the books, I've listened to a lot of the people who were kind of more around and kind of know it. But boy, it does seem like there was a lot of administrative red tape for a while. And I don't feel like I fully understand all of it. I think I understand some of it. But I mean, it just feels like Georgia is so much more committed to winning now, certainly in football, but kind of in all sports. There's a commitment to winning now that doesn't seem like it used to exist. And I don't know that I fully understand all of that, but it seems like it's probably true. Let's see what else. Lance D going back to that final play in the 2012 SEC championship game. Yeah, one of the real heartbreakers. I've also kind of alluded to this before. It's kind of a weird place in my life back then. It's just like that whole 2012, December 2012, is just sort of a strange time to look back on. Let us see what else. Kirby's Belt says last year our players were above mid but not elite. I think Georgia was not the best team in the country last year. I think that's true. I mean, I'm not quite so sure I thought Michigan was truly the best team in 2023, but I believe that Ohio State, I'm fairly convinced they were the best team in the country last year. I do think they probably were. Georgia was not the best team in the country last season. I feel confident saying that. But, some of this kind of comes down to whatever your definition of elite is. And I'm not trying to do a bit here. Like Georgia did beat Texas twice. Georgia did win the toughest SEC of all time. And this is what my message, and we're going to do more of this once we kind of get out of this recruiting thing. We're going to do a little more of this. For the people who want to be excessively skeptical of Georgia, thinking they may not make the college football playoff, for instance. They might be in the top 10, for instance. I do think you have to account for that last year, given everything that Georgia dealt with, they didn't fall apart. Like they didn't disappear from the national landscape. Yes, they lost to Notre Dame, and by Georgia standards, that's not a good game. But I would say it's also not a condemnation either. it's not one of these things that, I mean, maybe I'm just too close to it, and maybe I'll end up being wrong. And I'm totally open to the possibility that I might be. Totally open to that. I'm not going to tell somebody else that they are for sure going to be wrong. All I'm saying is if you are wrong, we're going to remember. And if you're right, we'll give you the credit for it. But I think that Georgia's had a good offseason. I do. I think things feel really good around Georgia. I do. Now, when you think about all the things that needs to break their way, better offensive line, better running game, better wide receiver play, better rush defense, replacing NFL draft picks. If you make a list of all the things that need to break Georgia's way, the law of probability just suggests every single one of those things won't break in Georgia's direction. You may have better play from the offensive line, but the wide receivers might end up being a disappointment. You may beef up your rushing attack, but your rush defense may be about where it was. I think the odds are that you won't get positive resolutions to all of these unanswered open questions. But what if half of them break your way? Really, what if half of them break your way? I mean, is there a chance that Georgia's even a little bit better than what it was a year ago? And I actually think moving forward, national champions are going to be pretty difficult to predict. We were kind of on Ohio State going to the playoff. Most people were not. That you're going to have to assume that every national champion moving forward overcomes some flaws, shakes off a bad performance, plays well when it needs to. That there's really no one out there, I think, that's set up to be more perfect than Georgia is. I don't think, anyway. And, the other thing, and people are allowed to think whatever they want to think, but anybody who wants to make this upcoming season be some sort of referendum solely on Gunnar Stockton at quarterback, I'm sorry. With all due respect, that person is revealing themselves just to be sort of a low-information, Paul Feinbaum level college football talker. There are 22 guys in the field, and while quarterback is clearly the most important position, what determines Georgia's fate, we have history of proving this, what determines Georgia's fate is a lot of stuff, quarterback being one, but perhaps not more important than these other issues. This upcoming season is just not a referendum on Gunnar Stockton. Our belief about Gunnar Stockton is that Stockton's performance will be in the range of what Georgia quarterbacks typically are, that his total touchdown passes, somewhere between 24 and 30. His yards per attempt, somewhere between 7.5 and 9, hopefully closer to the 9. That there is a fairly established range of quarterback performance at Georgia, and Gunnar's performance this year is going to be somewhere in that range. Because really, in what is 9 seasons of Kirby at Georgia, you've kind of only got 1 year where you're kind of outside of that, and that was when Dwan Mathis became the starter in 2020 because of all the weirdness going on with the other guys on that roster. Everything else is fairly easy to predict, even though it seems like the various quarterbacks are wildly different. The actual performance kind of falls in a closely concentrated range. And we think one way or another, Gunnar's probably somewhere within that range as well, which means if you're playing defense and you're running the ball, and if you got some playmakers who step up, then you have a chance to have great success, which is pretty much what Georgia had in 2021 and 2022. Let me go to Facebook for a moment. And let's see what's going on there. On Facebook. All right. Josh Hobbs mentioned 679 yards of drop balls last season. Yeah, it's not great. And I didn't know that was the total number, but it sounds like it could be true, certainly. And that's obviously something that Georgia's trying to improve on for this upcoming year. You're right about that. Or in Chile wants to get back to running the ball better. He says want to run it down their throats, and I think that Georgia's going to be really trying to do that too. Gary Holt says that transfer running back's going to help out. Yeah. I mean, look, we had sort of set up January, February as, man, this is going to be a running game that really features Nate Frazier. Well, that'd be fun. I think that Frazier's really good, but what Georgia's actually been at its best in recent years is kind of an ensemble, a collection of running backs. And by bringing in McCray from Illinois to go with Frazier and, Cash Jones and certainly maybe Roger Robinson and whatever else, all of a sudden now it sort of gets back to being Georgia's sort of rolling these backs, keeping everybody fresh and healthy a little bit more so than they had a year ago, where they didn't really have the between the tackles runner. Now with Rob, if he's still here and healthy, you presume that he is going to be, McCray coming over, all of a sudden now you've got a little bit more of the option of the between the tackles runners than you maybe had a year ago. Josh Hobbs says, it'd be nice to see a good running game this year. Yes, it would. Yes, it would. Everything gets easier if you're doing that. Everything gets easier. And that's before you add in, and I still don't quite know how much of this there will be. There may not be very much. That's also before you kind of add in whatever maybe Gunnar Stockton provides you on the ground. Let's see what else. Craig Hill says NIL's created the rich get richer. Kind of, I would say that there has been, some balance brought to the sport because of the NIL. We do see top recruits spread themselves out a little bit more so than they used to. We also don't necessarily see, the money bags programs winning every single recruiting battle. And I've also said before too, is that eventually I think you could see a little bit of a market correction with some of these programs that spend so much money, because I don't care how rich you are. Warren Buffett, what was Warren Buffett's first rule of investing? Rule 1, don't lose money. I don't care how rich you are. Rich people don't like losing money. And so right now, everybody kind of has the vision of, well, if I give a bunch of money to my alma mater or my favorite team, they're going to win and I'm going to be the hero because I'm the one that paid for it all. But that's not going to work out for everybody. It's just not. It's really just not going to work for everybody. That there are going to be, and in fact, we have a little bit of an example of this too. Class of 2022, Sliced Bread said Texas A&M spent $20-30 million. We laughed at that at the time and obviously been proven correct. But they did spend a lot. Whatever it was, they spent a lot. But if you notice, they haven't really been spending that way since then. That, when you spend big and you don't get big return on your spend, all of a sudden you're a little less enthusiastic about spending big after that. We kind of cited the poker craze before. Go back to the early 2000s. Poker's everywhere. Online. It's on TV. People are getting involved. It was a professional sport that, regular average Joes thought they had a chance to succeed at. And for a while, new money coming into the game. But unless you're prone to problematic behavior, there's a disincentive for playing when you lose. And if you're not an edge player, you are eventually going to lose. And once people lost in poker, they're like, this sucks. I'm not doing this anymore. I promise you there is some of that coming in the NIL space too. Now, it's not going to change the game completely, but right now, the never-ending bidding wars only keep going up for the simple reason that people haven't seen what it's gonna feel like when their money doesn't return on the investment. We're gonna see some market correction come once some of that happens, I feel confident saying. Lou mentioning nice guy coaches. I know this makes me a corny guy, makes me sentimental, but I do want college football to be a place where you can have different kinds of coaches. I do. Look, I'm glad that Kirby's got the personality that he has. It's obviously worked great for Georgia. It clearly works well for him, and there's a certain inspiration I draw from Kirby's tenacity and intensity. That's, it's very masculine. It's easy to respect that. I don't want every college football coach to be like Kirby Smart. I just don't. That would be grating and tiresome. I do like the fact that there are other ways you can win. Not every coach is cut from the Nick Saban cloth. Dabo Swinney wasn't. Ed Orgeron wasn't. Orgeron won a national championship. We forget that. Maybe coached the greatest team of all time. Different kind of personality. We have, I would say, a few different personality types in the SEC right now. I kind of want that. I'm glad Kirby's got the personality he has because it's obviously bringing my favorite team great success. I don't want every coach to be like that. I don't. Rocky Dennis says nice guys don't win national championships. But Dabo Swinney won twice. I know that it's easy to say that, but Dabo genuinely is someone who I would probably put, broadly speaking, in the nice guy category. He is certainly committed to a persona that I would say is a good bit different than Kirby Smart's. And Dabo is 1-2, and that's going to be a very highly ranked preseason team this year as well. Like, the Dabo era is not quite over as of yet. Let's see what else. What else is going on? Josh Hobbs says, I like Gunnar Stockton. This is on Facebook. I think the receivers around him give us a chance to be much better than last year, but we got to have a better running game as well. Yeah, like Georgia's attempt to improve the offense has been spent bringing in what they believe is better personnel. I think they believe, as Cole Kublik, we talked about him yesterday, a healthier offensive line will be a better offensive line. Gunnar Stockton is a guy who has been here. He's known the Bobo family forever. This is just their guy. The team believes in him. We'll find out how successful he ends up being. I tell you all the time, I try to be careful with things that we want to be true, because oftentimes we want it so bad to be true that maybe it doesn't quite work out the way we want. And I'm on guard for that when it comes to Gunnar Stockton. I really am. That, hey, just because we like the personality type, we want it to be true, doesn't mean it will be. But the impression that we get, no matter what somebody else may say, and I can't control what other people say. I've given up trying to control what other people say. But everything we have been led to believe is that Georgia thinks that Gunnar can be good enough to get them where they want to go. We certainly think that too. And obviously this includes what is a pretty significant upgrade in personnel offensively overall. I also see some YouTube commentary about the presidential commission that, could be kind of protecting the future of college athletics. We don't talk about politics, never will, but I've told you on the show before, in the last few days, I'm more optimistic about college athletics' future right now than I have been in a while. I think there's a chance to preserve this. I think there's a chance to use the current mood, which is a little bit of exasperation with the craziest aspects of what we've seen. I think there's a chance to leverage that and get something out of this. UGA Marine checking out. Appreciate you being here. Randy Hall pointing out that of Georgia's 37 players who played the most, 31 of them were drafted. It's an incredible number for Georgia. Incredible. Incredible number. JP says, according to many agents and recruiting analysts, Kirby Smart's getting a discount on the top players due to everything else he can offer, mainly NFL development. That may be true, but I'm a little skeptical of some of that as well. Like, I am very, very skeptical of like neat and tidy narratives. There was a time when programs liked the idea of this is how big our offers are. I didn't really believe that. Georgia, you might be led to believe, likes the idea of, man, Georgia gets away with paying these guys less. I'm a little skeptical of that too. I really am. I am very, very suspicious of narratives that are a little too neat and tidy, that fit into too pre-established of a box. But you're right, JP. There are plenty of people who said that directly, even about Jared Curtis. And anything is possible, but I'm also as skeptical of stuff like that as I would be of almost anything else. Brooke Dog says, good luck to us today on the Cantwell announcement. He says, I won't be watching because when I watch, they never come to Georgia. Well, hopefully it'll be good news. Maybe you can go back and rewatch after the fact. Richard D's checking in, says, with many schools copying Georgia's and Kirby's mantra that defense winning championships, is Georgia's still defensively focused, especially in your opinion, even their NIL? I mean, I think that the one thing, Kirby says a lot of stuff that's sort of like coach speak-ish, and it kind of just goes in one ear and out the other. But every now and then, he just sort of drops, the real. I mean, he said during spring practice, they have been harping on being better against the run. Y'all, don't discount that. As Richard says, we've seen a little bit of a reversion to form for defense the last couple of years. Some of this is impacted by clock rules. But we're not watching these teams. In 2018, 2019, we had teams scoring 50 points per game. Did we even have anybody score 40 points per game a year ago? Did we have any of that last year? Hold on. Okay, yeah. So you had two teams that scored more than 40 points per game. In 2019, we had 8. 8 teams averaged more than 40 points per game in 2019, 2 a year ago. So the offensive, take over the sport has slowed down at least a little bit for right now. Defense has mattered again. Ohio State, very good defense. Michigan, very good defense. Georgia, obviously, 2 great defenses. Post-pandemic, defense has kind of been back in college football. Georgia, perhaps not coincidentally, has been out of the national championship picture the last 2 years because they've had a rush defense that's been outside the top 30. What if that's better? Y'all, we talked about before all the things that need to sort of break Georgia's way. What if Georgia just gives up fewer rushing yards? Like, what if it's the same Georgia team from a year ago in terms of production, but all of a sudden it's a rush defense kind of more inside the top 15 as opposed to right around top 40? Like, what if that's the case? Like, that alone is a pretty significant lever that could be pulled. Just keep that in mind. That if Georgia goes out and does this year what it did last year, it's not going to be a national championship team. But it only takes a couple of things moving in a different direction for the entire deal to feel different. Foster Moss, the Grand Theft Auto graphics. There you go. Yeah. I am not looking forward to seeing my face on those fancy cameras, but we'll see how it goes. Army Dog wants to see Georgia get back to RBU. Yeah, I mean, running the ball, playing better rush defense, that alone could be enough. Morris Rich says he's going to be in for today. I love that, Morris. Appreciate that. DT says new clock rules, fewer plays, lower scores. Yeah, which is maximizing the value of possessions a little bit more. JP says if the defensive line stays healthy, they will be better. Jordan Hall looked great at G-Day. Miller is poised for a big year, and Griffin looks like the real deal. Yeah, I think all that's true. I'd love to see him kind of, whether it's like Nnamdi Boko or wherever, I'd love to see that. It's not going to be Jordan Davis, but just somebody who kind of occupies a little bit more of that sort of space eater role, in the kind of the nose guard position. I'd love to see somebody like that step to the forefront. But a healthy Jordan Hall, a healthy Christian Miller, these are high-level defensive linemen. Potentially anyway. And I do think that Elijah Griffin's going to play. I do. All right, we got to go. Boy, it gets late fast. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. They'll even get your air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. as this warm weather's kind of here. Stay comfortable and cool all summer long. R.S. Andrews can help you out with that. Y'all have a great day. See you this afternoon. It's Jackson Cantwell time. We can't wait for that. And then we'll come back and talk about it tomorrow, one way or another, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We'll talk to you then.